Hello everyone, welcome to another video of database concept and design video series. In the previous video we learned how can we create tables for our database, but in today's video we are going to learn how can we insert records to the previously created tables, how can we select them and display the records, and also how can we delete the records. Now this is lab 3, insert, retrieve and delete data from database using SQL. We have insert data to selected using, we have select, display, update and delete the records. Let's go ahead and then work on the insertion. We insert some records to our table. I will firstly open the ERD for the previous lab. I just want to open it for our reference. Now this is the ERD that we had. Then I will just go back and to the insert lab 3 and then the insertion. First thing, let's start our XAMPP server and we open up the command prompt. My XAMPP is already working, it's running, and my Apache and my MySQL is both of them are up and running. I will open up the shell, set MySQL -u root -p, then the password, and then we are going to use the database show databases. The database that we have is tmf. We're going to say use tmf 2034 db, and then the database is changed, the default one, and then we are going to say show tables. These are the tables that we created in the previous lab. Now we can go back to our ERD. You can see here we have enrollment, course, students, lecturer. We want to insert some records to every table. Let me open up this is our SQL file that we use, the queries that we had used in the previous video. Alright, and then we're just going to work on it after for 2 days we are going to insert it in here. For the insertion we are going to insert into what table. Let me open up W3 School. You can go to W3 School. For the reference we are going to work on the SQL, learn SQL, and then in here we can see insert into. Here this is the syntax. You need to know like what is that, the syntax. The first thing is insert into, and then you have to name the table, what table you are going to insert the records, and then the specific columns, column 1 to which column that you are going, and then you add the values to that tables. These are the values. For example, let's say you want to add to the table as customers, and then what columns, you give the columns, and then after that the in records. For us, let's go to the table students. First thing we say describe students. Now this is the describe students. We have these columns. As you can see here, the faculty it was for our practice and our test, and as you can check the ERD, the faculty doesn't exist, so we need to, I will be going to delete the faculty. I will use the alter command, alter table students, and then drop column faculty, and then when I say describe students, you can see the faculty has been deleted and dropped. Then we can go and then insert the student ID. You can see student ID, student name, email and intake here. These are the columns that we have. I'll go back to our SQL file. I'll just say insert into which table, students, and then you need to add the columns and then the values that you want. And then if you want to check, you can see here insert into customers. These are the columns that you have. You can have many, and then values. Alright, I will go add some values, and then here the students. The first column is student ID, then student name, email. Let's go ahead. You have to make sure it is exactly the same column name. You can just copy paste it. Then we have student name, student email, then intake year. These are the column names. You have to make sure they are the exact name with your column in your table. After that, we will be going to use the values. So the first one is in student ID. I will just give it a 1. You can see here it is an integer, so you have to make sure that you are writing an integer, you are giving it as integer. The second one is a string. You can give it a name as, like for example, I just give it Ahmed, and then the email, it's also a character. You can say ahmed@gmail.com, and then the last one is intake here. What is the intake here? You can check is an integer. Then we are also going to provide an integer, let's say 2022. If you run this query, you will be inserting the record Ahmad in our table. I'll show you select all from students. You can see here currently we do not have any records, but then when you insert this to your table, then the query executed with the 0.1 second. Then now when we say select all from a student, you can see here we have a student ID 1 with the name of Ahmed, and this is the email and the intake here. This is how you insert records to your table. Let's go ahead, add more students up to 5, and then I will just copy paste this 4 times. You have to make sure that their student ID is not the same, because you will face an error because it is a primary key and it is your ID. And then 3 and 4 and 5. Then the names, I will just going to say Mary, and this one it's 2021, this is 2018, this is 14, and this is 16. And then this one we can give it a name of Gary, and this one you can give it a name of Haziq, let's say one you can say Joe. Just any random names, and then you can just copy paste then the new one, just paste it here. And then when we say select all from students, you can see here we have 5 records: Ahmed, Mary, Harry, Gary, Haziq, and Joe, and these are the records. You can have many, as much as you can have, like up to 100 or 1000, depends on your need. You can just insert records. This is how you can insert records to your table. You have to just make sure that you are giving the table name, and then we have your column name, and then the rest is the records that you want to have. Let's go to the table. For example, the lecturer, we say describe lecturer, and then what do we have? Lecturer ID and lecturer name. Alright, then here I will just use the same syntax, insert into table. What is the table name? Lecturer. And then what are the values? Then you need to write the values. The first one is lecturer ID. You can check here, we have lecturer ID and lecturer name. Lecturer ID and lecturer name. So what is the first lecturer ID? 1, and then the lecturer name you can give it, for example, Dr. Bong, and this is 1 record. I'll just copy paste this one 5 times, so we can have 5 lecturers. We can say 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, and then the name of the lecturer you can give it, like for example, Madam Inson, and you can have, for example, modern neural. And this one you can give it a name, Dr. Johari, Prof. Wang. These are the just 5 lecturers. Just add to our tables. You can see here table lecturer. When I say select all from lecturer, currently is empty. Then I will just paste the records. You can see the first one executed 0.35, 0.28, and then right now when I just say select all from lecturer, you can see here we also have 5 lecturers, and these are the names and then the IDs. You have to remember the lecturer ID, because this lecturer IDs are the primary key, but at the same time they are the foreign key in table course. Now let's go add some records to our table course, and then the same thing I will just say insert into the table name is course, and then what are the values that you want to have. The first one you can say here, let me open up in here, you can say describe course. We have a course ID, course name, and lecturer ID. This lecturer ID is, you need to pick it up from here, 1, 2, 3, 4, whose lecturer is teaching what. Now first thing, we go lecturer ID, we have a course ID, we have a course ID, and then the course name, then we have a course ID, course name, and then let's say we have a lecturer ID also. Then here you can add the course ID. Our course ID, course ID is currently integer. If you want to have like a TMF20, you want to have something different, you can just change this one to the varchar. I will be going to use a simple one like course ID 1, and then the course name, let's give it a name, database concepts, and then who is going to teach this database concepts and design, you can just give it a full name and design. You can just say okay, Dr. Wong. Then what is the lecturer ID? You have to pick it here. Dr. Bong has a lecturer ID 1, so you can say lecturer ID 1. Then I'll just copy this 5 times like this. Then I will just add the course ID 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. Here I just leave it as empty for now. We just pick random lecturer. Then here also we are going to change them. Let's say course number 2, who is going to teach this one? Let's say introduction to programming, and then who is going to teach it? Let's say Dr. Johari, and then the lecturer ID is 4. Let's say lecturer ID 4. Then number 3, let's say what course? Let's say Prof. Wang. We can say final year project, and then who is teaching it? Let's say Prof. Wang. What is the ID? You need to pick the exact ID of that lecturer, number 5. Now let's go ahead, add like for example another one, like let's say Madam Nurul or Madam Inson. Let's say advanced database is teaching by Madam Inson. What is the lecturer ID? Number 2. And then let's say another course, we just write down for example information system, and then course ID Madam Nurul number 3. and then you can add another course also, but just leave it as 5, it's okay. I'll just say again, explain it like database concept design has a course ID 1, and then who is teaching this? Lecturer ID 1. Who is lecturer ID 1 is Dr. Bong. Later on when we're using join, you can easily understand why we are using like the ID, because this is the primary key in here and the foreign key in this record. And then we have course ID 2, introduction programming, number 4. Who is number 4? Dr. Johari. And then final year project number 5 is Prof 1. Let's go ahead and then we just copy the records. We just paste it in our command, and then you can see here when I say now select all from course, select all from course, our table course like this. We have a database concept design, and this is a lecturer ID. You can refer this later on. You can see here select all from lecturer, and then you can check here lecturer ID 1, and then ID 1, ID 5, and here is ID 5. You can refer to this easily. The next table is table enrollment. We just say describe enrollment, and then we have enrollment ID, student ID, and course ID. This one has 2 foreign keys. You can see here it has 2 foreign keys. Let's go check here. Here we have enrollment ID, who is students, for example enrollment ID 1 and the student ID 1. You can say here, for example Ahmad, he registered for course. Which course? Let's say we give it a name of the course ID, this one. Let's go ahead, I will just let's add some records. Now when we say select all from enrollment, it is currently empty. Now we go to our table, to our file. We say insert into enrollment, and then what is the first one? Enrollment ID, student ID, then course ID, and then values. What are the values that we have? I'll just copy this like more than this one. You can see the first one, second one, third, and so on. You can check, let me check what do we have here, student ID and course ID. Let's say we have an enrollment ID of 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So these are the 8 students we have, they registered for the course. Then we go and then we say what is the student ID. Let's say a student ID 1, we can say Ahmad, a student ID 1, and then he registered course ID. What is the course ID? You can say Ahmad registered for final year project. We say okay, number 3, course ID number 3. Again you can say Ahmad registered for another course, and then you give it another name. For example, Ahmad also registered for information system, let's say 5. Then we can say Joe, Joey or Joe, he registered a student ID number 5. He registered for course, let's say database concept and design. Then you need to provide the ID of that course. You can see here 1. Then another, for example, Mari, ID number 2, student ID. This is number 2. And then what is the Mari ID? Is 2. And then the Mari is registered for, let's say, advanced database. What is the course ID? Is 4. Again, Mari is number 2, the same person, Mari, with the ID number 2. She registered for, let's say, introduction to programming. What is the course ID? Is also number 2, introduction programming number 2. Let's say Haziq, ID number 4, it's number ID 4. He registered for the course, let's say also final year project. We give it a ID number 3. Then let's say for example Gary number 3. You have to check like, okay, what is the Gary student ID? The student ID of Gary is 3. So here we just insert the 3, and then Gary registered for, let's say, information system 5. He also registered for a student number 3, Gary, also registered for database concept and design number 1. Let's say Gary is also registered for another course, and then here you need to make sure you give the name of the enrollment ID 9, and then the student ID is Gary number 3, and then he also registered for number 2. So these are the records. I'll just insert to our table enrollment, and then when you say select all from enrollment, you can see here we have a course ID, enrollment ID, student ID, and a course ID. Now we go to select all from students. You can see here, and then select all from course, select all from course. It has a spelling, okay, COU. You can see here we have a enrollment, someone registered with the ID number 1, and then we can go to the ID number 1, which is Ahmed. You can track he registered for course number 3. What is the course number 3? Final year project. And then also you can check here we have a student number 4, enrollment ID 4. What is the student number 2? Student number 2 is Marie, and then she registered for course ID 4. Course ID 4 is advanced database. You can add more records to your table, but in this way we just can track them. Later on when we are using the join statement, you can easily understand why we are using the foreign key and primary key to like how can we connect the two tables, and then how can we display the 2 or 3 tables together. Now we already successfully inserted records to these 4 tables. When you go check here insert data using table, you can see here show tables, insert into, and then they added some records to the table. I just did the same thing. Now the next topic is select and display data from table using SQL. If you want to use, if you remember, I already used you can go ahead and then here, let me just reduce this. You can say here select. The select statement is very powerful. You will be, and all of us will be using this many times in the future or current. If you want to display you can see here, it will return the stored result in a table. It will display the data from a table. For example, when you say select all, this star sign is used for the all. It will show you every records that you have in your table. Currently you see we have used the select all many times. Select all from students, select all from enrollment. You can say select all from lecturer. You can see everything will be selected. Now if you want to select a specific column, you can use the column name. For example, what columns that you want to show. For example, now when you say select all from students, we have many columns, but you just care about the name. You can say select student name, student email from students. What will happen? Instead of saying all, we are using the specific 2 columns, student name and student email. If you want to show only one column, you just have, for example, student name. It will give you only the name. If you want to have more columns, select student name, student let's say intake year, and then you can say student ID from table students. You can see the ordering is also based on what you write. First thing is student name, intake year, and then the student ID. And this is how you select from your table. We also can you have here, let me go back here, what do we have? Select all, select a specific column, we already covered, and then we have a where clause. What is the where clause? For example, the where clause is very useful if you want to select specific records. For example, definition is used to filter the records. As I said here, to, for example, let's say in our example, we say select all from students. Now it will show you all the students that you have. Imagine you have hundreds of records or thousands, then you do not want to see everything. Now where clause, it's come here, you can say select all from students where the intake year, for example, the intake year is greater than, let's say, those, show me those students that their intake year is greater than 2018. Then what will happen? It will display all the records, all the students that their intake year is greater than 2018. You can see here 16, 14, and 18. Why? The reason the 18 is not showing, because here we say greater than 18. But if you want to show, you can say greater than equal. Then what will happen? You can see here the 18 is also showing here. The where clause is very powerful. And then, for example, you can say also select all from students, and then, for example, where the student ID is less than, for example, 3. What will happen? It will show you 1 and 2, those that they have. You can also select the names. For later on we will understand, we will learn about the and or. Then we are going to use the where student ID is 3 and the name is, like, for example, Ahmed. But right now we are focusing on the where. Where is used to filter some records. For example, they go to select all from lecturer, and then here you can say select all from lecturer where lecturer ID is greater than 3. Then you will have 4 and 5. Then we have also where clause. How can we use the where clause? Here in this, we said like where the student name equals to Enson. Even you can specify the exact name in the where clause. Then we have also update the information. If somehow you want to update the information, let's say they want to update the course, you can use the update statement. Here the update the statement, this is the syntax. You just say update table name, what table you want to update, and then you just set the column. For example, set the new data that you want to put. You specify the column and then the value. If you want to have multiple columns to update, then you just put like this. And then here is where condition. You have to mention which records that you want to edit. For example, in this example, what they did here, select, they updated the student name, they changed the student email and intake year to 2016, where the student is ID to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then let's go ahead and change something in our table. We can go use update, and then you say update table. Let's say, for example, here update customers. Now we want to update. Let me check, what do we have here? We have students. Okay, let's check the students. Firstly, we say select all from students. Let's update, or maybe lecturer. Now we have Dr. Bong, Nurul, Morsowang. Let's go back to the students. Let's change the intake year of 2014 to 2019. How can you use it? Update and then students. After that, let me go to here. It is better, we can just copy paste it later on. You can say update students and then set. Okay, now what is the contact name? Alfred Schmidt. For us, we want to update the intake year. Intake year, I want to update the 2014 to 2018. 2019, let's say 19. Now here there is a one tricky part, because when you run this query, then the SQL will update all. You have to mention which students that you want to change. We want to change the student ID number 4 based on the primary key. As you can see here, if you read here, they said when you are using, you have to make sure to use the where clause based on the primary key. Why use primary key? Because primary key is unique to this record only. For example, now a student Haziq, he has a unique ID of 4, so you can use exactly in our where clause. Now we say where, you can write it capital or a small letter, where student ID equals to number 4. Now I'll just copy this one, I'll go back here and then I will just paste it. You can see here it is executed, and then when we say select all from students, the ID number 4 Haziq, the intake year is changed to 2014. 2014 is changed to 2019. Imagine if you want to change the name even, you can just like use the same syntax, same query, update the students and then change the name. And now let's say if you want to change, let's say select all from course. You can see here we have these courses. Let's change the information system to information system laboratory. How can you do that? We have a course ID. It is unique to this one. We go back to our code, the file, we say update, what is the table name, course, and then we say what is the name of the course name. Update set course name. I want to update it to, this is the varchar, you have to put it in the double quote. I'm just gonna say information system and laboratory. Okay, information system laboratory, and then here we are going to use our where clause, where the course ID equals to, what is the course ID? Number 5. Now we change it to 5, course ID 5. Then I'll just copy paste this one, and then when I execute it, you can see here when I say select all from course, select all from course, here the name previously was information system, now here is information system and laboratory. And then I didn't change the lecturer ID, I just changed the course name. If you want to change multiple columns, you just simply add, like for example, after this, like a course name, then you just put the comma and then you just change the new column if you want to update the multiple columns. This is all about like how can you update the records. After that we have a delete table from our, for example, records. As I mentioned, where clause is very powerful. You are going to use the where clause many times. Where clause is like using, like you want to filter exactly, I want to update, delete this record. Let's go ahead and add the lecturer. Select all from lecturer. We have 5 lecturer. We say describe lecturer. I want to know what do we have in here. We have lecturer ID and lecturer name. Let's just add a new lecturer and then we delete it again. Now we have a lecturer ID, lecturer name. Let's say lecturer ID number 6, and the name of the lecturer is, let's say, Dr. JC. Now we have 6 lecturer. I will just insert this for practice. Insert into lecturer, lecturer ID, lecturer name, and the values number 6, and the name is Dr. JC. When you run it, it is added. When we say select all from lecturer, you can see Dr. JC is added. Now we want to delete the lecturer ID number 6. Let's go ahead. You can see here the syntax: delete from table, and then you need to write the where condition. You can see delete from what table? Table of students, and then where the ID is like this, where the ID is. Now we say delete from lecturer, and then where lect ID equals to 6, and then we say select all from lecturer. The lecturer ID number 6 has been deleted. This is how you can use the delete statement, and you have to make sure that you mention exactly what records do you want to delete. It is important because you want to delete exactly this ID, or for example any specific ID, then we are going to use the where clause. All right, and then we are done with this lab 3. In the next lab, we are going the lab 4. We are going to work with the functions in SQL. There are many predefined functions, like for example, how can you retrieve these things, and like for example, average function, and so on. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.